You're listening to episode 142 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. David Messer joins us to speak about his research with online mindfulness and cancer recovery. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is made available from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going. And if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. A question has been brewing in the global mindfulness community for a while about the value of online programs and whether they can compare to the experience of being in person. I frequently hear strong and certain judgments about this from people who have no experience teaching online. The fact is, there are different levels of what is meant by online. And my own experience has been that participants get as much out of these courses as in person, including the deep connections formed with one another. David Messer is a PhD in counseling psychology. He's a licensed psychologist, consultant, and educator specializing in mindfulness and technological innovation to improve client wellness, organizational functioning, and student achievement. Our guest today is David Messer. David, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Hi, Ted. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's get started by asking you a little bit about your background.
Yeah, this is a funny question. I mean, I can tell you about my professional background. I'm a psychologist, and in particular, a counseling psychologist. So I'm trained clinically to work with individuals or families and kids. I'm also trained to do research, which I think is what we're going to talk more about today. I think in regard to mindfulness and the study I did, my personal background is kind of important also. So I was raised in Eugene, Oregon. My parents are wonderful people, kind of old hippies. So as a kid, they taught me to meditate kind of when I was in high school. So probably the only kid on the block who after dinner, the whole family would go sit and meditate together for 10 or 15 minutes. So that was pretty wonderful. I'm trying to think what else would be useful. I'm not sure. I mean, I think I've just always kind of had motivation to try to help. Sometimes somewhat, I don't know if you would say arrogantly. I'm not sure. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a diplomat and like go solve the Mideast peace crisis, and like I thought I had all these ideas and I could do it, and why couldn't they do it? And I've always had this really strong urge to help, but I think personally I tend to do well with people, interacting with people, and so I think psychology and counseling psychology in particular has been a good fit. And as part of the program, we do a lot of research, and so I got a sense of how much research can move policy, how people listen to research, and also obviously how research is a really good way to ascertain what's true at a particular moment. So that's a lot of my, I guess, background and motivation for doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that we sometimes try to make on this podcast is the research is really good at supporting us having a greater understanding of what might be going on. And that doesn't eliminate, of course, that there's a personal response to the practice, and that is also something to understand and know that research is great at opening up ways of potential therapies that we might not have thought of before, and shows that there can be benefit for people in different situations, like we're going to be talking about today. So let's segue into that. What got you interested in doing this particular study?
Yeah, so this was a study examining the experience of cancer survivors and the potential for mindfulness training, and particularly mindfulness training online, to help them. So a big part of of my motivation is that my father is a cancer survivor multiple times over, and so I've had direct experience about how cancer is not just a physical condition. It's very far from it. So much of the diagnosis and being in treatment, and even after people are finished, quote unquote, with treatment, is the psychological experience of it. Not to mention the experience, as in my case, for family members coping with it. So when I look at cancer care, there's a lot of care and a lot of focus on the physical component, which makes sense. Obviously, we want people to
Yep.
live, and there's so much more to care and to supporting people than just that. I thought of meditation in particular because my dad, my parents have always meditated to some degree, but when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, he started meditating very regularly. And the few times that he doesn't talk a whole lot about his experience, but the few times that I would ask him about it, he shared how helpful meditation and particularly mindfulness is for him. And so, yeah, I thought I would look at it. And the part of me that really wants to make a difference sort of latched onto the internet based piece of it. The internet gives us the ability to scale treatments immediately to thousands, if not millions of people. And so while personally, like myself, I kind of like teaching and learning person to person, I couldn't ignore the potential there. That's sort of the motivation for this study.
So something deep in connection with your own life, and that provides some energy for you to do this work. And so let's start to take a look at what you did for this study. I'm very curious about when you say internet training, what did that look like? What was that intervention?
Yeah, so relatively simple. One of my thoughts about it was I want this to be something that people will actually do. There are different interventions. I think there's a trade-off between the more involved something is, quite possibly the more helpful it is, and in some ways the less likely people are to do it, right? So if you go to a website, are you likely to read 20 pages of text and go through demonstrations and examples? Maybe, maybe not. Are you likely to read one page of text? Yeah, probably, right? You probably do that. So real simple. The intervention was 6 weeks long. Each week, participants who were in the condition that received the mindfulness training intervention got a page to 2 pages of instruction, text, pictures, things like that. They got a guided meditation. Guided meditation was pretty brief, between 8 and 17 minutes long. So most of them were about 12. And they got simple ideas for how to practice this at work, when you're driving your car, when you're talking to your significant other, etc. So that was the intervention. So each week we asked them to practice the guided meditation, listen to that daily, and it was audio rather than video. We asked them, we said, the daily practices are optional, just do it if they're fun and interesting to you. And we asked them to read the lesson as many times as they liked, but at least once. Now, we compared that to folks who are getting care as usual. So all of these folks in the study were cancer survivors. So folks who had had stage 1 through 3 cancer. and were done with major treatment, but they were still within 3 years of that remission.
Okay.
So when we were treating stress, we wanted to make sure it was stress related to the cancer experience and not just, maybe different stress you might have 25 years later when your car breaks down. So that was the intervention. And then we looked at what's the effect. We studied before and after for folks in both conditions. What's the effect on, in particular, depression and anxiety, which are really common for folks who have had cancer, on overall mood, other pieces that might be common for folks, and on sleep, since sleep disturbance is a pretty common result of anxiety and going through major treatments as well, and fatigue, since that's a big indicator of how much people can realistically do in their life. So that was the study.
So, what did you find? You did some different measures, it sounds like. And what were those results? What came out of the study?
Well, the study showed that the intervention was really effective. So, on all of the measures, the folks who are doing the mindfulness training, along with the usual care, going to support groups, etc., did a good deal better than the folks who were just doing usual care, having doctor's visits, going to support groups. So, in every measure, the folks who did the training did better. And as has been found in other research, there was what we call a dose response relationship. So, the folks who practiced more often got more benefit. So folks got benefit even if they just sat down once a week and did the meditation and read the lesson. They got a little bit of benefit. They got more if they did it twice a week, and some folks did it every day, as we'd asked. That wasn't the majority, and that's okay. We assumed that. But the more you did it, the more benefit they got.
So, for you personally, what was the most interesting aspect of this, or perhaps an unexpected thing that came out of the results?
I mean, to be completely honest, Ted, I didn't know if it would work. I mean, self study is like a thing. People buy books, they read the books, they practice. Presumably, it does something. But the norm with teaching mindfulness is that there's in person instruction. I think there's a sense that there's some, I don't know, what do they say? Special sauce that being in person with a teacher is meaningful. You feel what they have to bring and you sort of take that. So presenting something over the internet was an unknown. And this is not the first study to present a mindfulness training over the internet, but it was the first study with a control condition to present something that wasn't led by a teacher in real time. So there are different types of online interventions. Some you get on and there is a teacher there and maybe other students are there as well and you can ask questions. This was what's called asynchronous. So you get on, you study at your own pace, you take time on the things you want to take time on, but there's no back and forth. So I honestly didn't know what the result would be. We didn't know if there was perhaps something necessary or useful about in-person interaction, and there very well might be. What we did find was that there was some benefit, and honestly, the research now suggests that the benefit of these what are called asynchronous interventions are about the same as those that are synchronous. It's interesting. I think a lot of folks, myself included, when you're meeting with new people in a classroom setting, that can be kind of anxiety provoking, right? And so for some people, I think not interacting with a lot of people can be a little more relaxing and they can move at their own pace. So yeah, so we found that this self-study, self-guided internet intervention was really useful. But yeah, I didn't know if it would be. I'm glad it is. And the main benefit of these asynchronous interventions is that they don't require a teacher to be there. So if you have really strong, insightful interventions, those can be made standard care, for example, for people who are coming out of cancer treatment. And it can be a resource just like a support group can be a resource. And it can really improve people's well being. So that was the most interesting and important finding for me.
Yeah, it removes the bottleneck of requiring to have, I will say, not just teachers but competent teachers. in direct live engagement with participants, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But just seeing that there can be this limitless scale for
Yeah,
standard intervention that might be just a little bit, that might be a way to help people just deal with what they're going through in, say, a post cancer recovery kind of mode. What might that be like? Is it beneficial to give just that dose, just that little bit that's going to help them? And that isn't a wrong thing any more than, say, running a 5K is bad because it's not a marathon. This is something that can still be
exactly.
helpful to do.
Yeah, even if there's less benefit, even if the benefit is small, if there's some benefit and that can be provided to everybody or a lot of people, that's a real difference.
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to share with those who are listening is for those who maybe teachers who are listening to this podcast and know that I do teach online as well as in person. And what I have found is that doing those, in particular with live video, where there's direct interaction with a teacher, has very strong connection and ability to reach participants in a program. And that one shouldn't dismiss that because it's different than face to face. And the same thing applies to asynchronous kinds of programs like this. It really depends on what is it you're trying to get out of this or provide for the participants in these programs. If it's, can we move the needle a little bit? Can we touch people in a way that otherwise they would have nothing? Then there's value in doing this kind of work. And if you really want to carry things even further forward and have the live interaction and the group participation, that's great. And that's another thing that can be done too. So it's good to see this kind of program go forward. And I'm wondering, David, what would you like to see happen in the future with mindfulness programs or in anything really that helps people who are suffering in some way, like dealing with cancer recovery?
I don't know honestly that personally I have a strong feeling about like, oh, I'm really pro mindfulness and this should be incorporated.
Mhm.
I'm pro what helps people. And I really trust people's individual experiences and I trust the research. And the research is basically just listening to people's individual experiences all together and seeing what helps whom. So the research at the moment and people's individual experiences that I've heard suggest that being able to be with the fact that they've had cancer and integrate that into their lives and not running from that, then be able to live in the way that's most meaningful to them is really helpful for this particular condition, given that a lot of people have fear of recurrence and whatnot. So, given that it seems like this is helpful, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it would be really useful to have treatments like this as an option for folks who are leaving care, leaving hospital based care. Synchronous treatments are really important too and can be very helpful. So I think given that probably different types of learning work best for different people, having mindfulness programs that involve some asynchronous elements that people can engage in on their own and the ability to connect with a teacher or other students for support, I think would be wonderful. I think that's one of the challenges, for example, when people leave hospital-based care, they maybe have been going to support groups, they have lots of connection with other people, and then when they leave, all of a sudden they're on their own. So I think that connection with people, like you're saying, is important too.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're describing, what to me sounds like a portfolio of care. That there's, in addition to one's medical treatment, which said this is perhaps the most important in dealing with medical conditions like cancer and its recovery, is that once that part of the portfolio of care finishes, medically, right now, you're fine. There's still this other part that you mentioned in the very beginning, which is that's not the totality of the experience with cancer. There's also mental and emotional challenges that may still echo quite strongly for the rest of one's life, or maybe they're very resilient and it's just a couple of weeks of, well, that was interesting. But having the ability to offer for those people wherever they happen to be within this encounter with cancer, and it and also for caregivers as well. That there can also be benefits for caregivers to get some asynchronous help with what they're going through as they're providing support to someone that they love or are caring for. These are
Yeah,
all important aspects of this portfolio of care that doesn't just end with the medical, that there needs to be something more than that.
absolutely. And I think a lot of people's challenges, even after their major treatments have stopped, are cyclical. So some people, the first few weeks are really difficult, and then things get a little bit better, and then it's difficult again throughout your life. And so even if the mindful learning mindfulness isn't super important right away, and it might be super important right away for some people, knowing it's there so that when things get challenging a year, 5 years, 10 years down the line, they know, oh, there was this thing that helped me a lot right after my treatment. Maybe I'll go back to that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I also like the way you use the particular wording, and this is great to hear from researcher wording of seems to be, indicates, that science is tentative. Research is always tentative and can be changed and updated as we have more information. But in particular, with this personal experience, that your individual mileage may vary. What this is like for you can be a little different than it is for the person going through the same thing. And that's also something to notice. What's it like for you? And what are things that may be most helpful to you on that journey? So
yeah,
thank you for
absolutely.
characterizing things that way. Appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah. Everyone's experience is different. I mean, research looks at what's helpful to the most amount of people, right, on average. And every single individual person responds differently. So, yeah, I would really encourage anybody who's going through something like this to listen to themselves, to trust their own inner wisdom, their own sense of what's helpful for them, and to pursue that.
Yeah. And one thing I will encourage, because sometimes I hear that taken as, oh, well, medical treatment sounds unpleasant, so I'm not going to do that. Sometimes what is most helpful to you is not what we want to do. It may not be, as in my case, a couple of major surgeries. And for many listening, it may be chemo treatments. That this is part of getting well. And part of our mindfulness practice is seeing things as they are and receiving what is also things we don't want to have to go through, but then can nonetheless sustain and prolong or even save our lives. So when we talk about what is best, it may not always be what's comfortable, but what is going to be most helpful to us.
I really appreciate you saying that, Ted. I want to be clear. Mindfulness was not developed to treat disease. That wasn't sort of why it was developed in the first place. And it's not a replacement for traditional therapies. And to be totally honest, in terms of the research, there's a little bit of research that suggests there's a little bit of immune benefit for meditation, which
Yep.
makes sense, right? You're calming your body down, you're able to deal with stress more easily, and it's not a treatment. It's a
Right.
treatment for the stress and the psychological impact of going through it, but it's not a treatment for the disease in and of itself. At least there's no research right now to suggest that at all.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, is that if you hear, and this is part of minding the hype about mindfulness, mindfulness is not a cure all and is not, as you're saying, a replacement for medical treatment. So, one of the things, in fact, I was mentioning this in a talk I was giving just yesterday. It's concerning to me when people have say, a positive experience on a retreat of a few days and think, well, this positive experience, I can stop taking my medication for X condition. And of course, as a teacher, never recommend this for lots of reasons. But one of the main ones is you're in very unique conditions when you're on, say, a retreat. And of course, you may feel better getting out of what stressors you have in your life. It's like when one takes vacation, and this often is a comparison made as that mindfulness is no better than vacation. It's a different thing than that. And some of those conditions are the same. I'm outside of the regular stresses of my life. And mindfulness is about how to work with the life while you're in the midst of those stressors, not avoiding them. So please don't stop taking your meds. Don't stop regular treatment. This is something to help you with how you're doing with all of that. And as David said, there are some indications. David Cresswell's work on HIV patients and seeing some measurable indicators of how that may be affecting biological resistance. That's great. And it's very early on in these kinds of studies. So always keep that in mind. David, I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to share with the listeners today.
I think one of the pieces of mindfulness that's been most helpful to me is it allows you the space to be with whatever is going on for you, whether that's easy and pleasant or whether that's difficult and unpleasant. I think I would just share that for anyone who has a chronic disease or an acute disease, that it's okay and really helpful to have a wide variety of feelings about the condition, to sometimes feel okay and optimistic and confident, and to sometimes feel really not okay and sad and depressed. And I think there's often pressure for folks who have diseases, chronic diseases, cancer in particular, to hold up a good front and fight. And if that's useful for you, if that's useful some of the time, then fantastic. And there's no right way to be with cancer or with a disease. However you're feeling is okay. And if you're not feeling well, getting social support and care from hospitals or psychological support from counselors, all that is great. And it's okay to be however you are, that you don't have to be just how other people around you want you to be.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Thank you so much for raising that. I often hear the characterization of going through cancer treatment as fighting it and beating it. And of course, that sets an expectation that it's somehow on you to beat this. And that can be a subtle form of aggression and making some attribution of responsibility on you for how the body is biologically responding. And if it's encouraging you to do your treatments and do the things you need to do on a path to care as you're going through this, that's great. And don't take it as something you're personally failing at, and when the body does what the body does and you're dealing under difficult circumstances. It's a great point, David. Thank you so much. So our guest today, David Messer, I'll be providing some links, including to the paper that we're talking about today. And David, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Ted. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.